So what is up, Africana fam? Going straight into this video, I'll be showing you guys how to construct your frontal wig from start to finish. So the things you will need is a dome head that is your size. I have a 23-inch dome head and some nylon thread with some needles, as well as a mesh dome wig cap and a metallic silver Sharpie, as well as some shears. And last but not least, your bundles and your frontal, and the hair specs will be down below in the description box. So right now I'm showing you guys how the dome cap look like. I have the mesh one and not the regular spandex one because it's more breathable because of the little holes and it is durable. So I went ahead and just put the dome cap onto the wig head, and now I'm going to go ahead and just use those two seams as my outline of where I'm going to stretch the nape out. And I like to just bring down the wig so it looks like this. So it kind of creates a little box at the bottom. So now I like to go ahead and T-pin the frontal, and I like my frontal to be about 1 inch forward. I like the hairline to be 1 inch forward of the wig cap, and I like to T-pin the middle and the middle and the back of the frontal first, just so I'm able to stretch from side to side. And in the back, I'm just going to go ahead and stretch one side and then T-pin it, and then go on the other side and T-pin it. And the perforated side of the frontal should be nice and flat onto the wig cap. There should be no lumps or bumps or no spaces or bubbles in between. As you guys can see, it's nice and flat. And in the front, it creates this M shape. And as you guys can see, the hairline is about 1 inch away from the wig cap, or 1 inch forward from the wig cap on the entire hairline. So now onto sewing. I'm going to go in with my nylon thread and my needle, and I like to sew starting from the middle first, just so I'm able to go side by side and make sure that it is nice and flat on both sides and not just on one side. And what I like to do is I like to sew under. It doesn't really matter exactly if you sew under or over, but I personally like to sew under just because I feel like it makes it flatter. And I like to sew very close together. You want to make sure that when you're sewing, it's not far apart, because when it's far apart, it's easier for the thread to unravel. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the mesh and sew through. And whenever I'm sewing, as you guys can see, those seams, I don't like to sew in the seam, because then it won't be able to stretch as much. Now we are getting to the band part, and when it comes to the band, I like to go through just the first layer, which is just the mesh, instead of just going through the mesh and the spandex part. And this will just ensure that your wig is still able to stretch. So there's 2 layers. There's the mesh and then there's the spandex. Like I said, I just like to go through the mesh part just so that my wig can still stretch. And when it comes to sewing, when I get to the end, I like to backtrack a little bit and go upwards, just to ensure that it doesn't unravel at the ends of the frontals, because usually the frontal unravels there because people end it there. So I just like to go all the way down and then come back up. And I like to go past the spandex part before I start knotting my thread to end it and cut it there. And what I'm going to go ahead and do is, when I am knotting my hair, I like to go around the needle 3 times and then pull through. And I did this about 2 to 3 sews in, just to make sure that, you know, if one knot unravels, there's still another knot to protect the frontal. And I like to spread apart the thread and make sure it's nice and tight, and then I go ahead and cut it. And I promise you guys, your frontal would never unravel, even when you cut off the excess material underneath. And I went ahead and did the other side off camera, and this is how it should look. So now onto the marking. I like to go ahead into my metallic silver Sharpie marker, and what I'm doing is I'm marking my where my tracks are going to lay. And I always like to mark above the elastic band just to make sure that, you know, the wig stretches. I don't like to sew on the elastic band at all, especially at the nape. So my rule of thumb is I like to make sure that the lines are about 1 inch apart. And I'm just following the natural curve of the head. And as we get closer and closer to the top, it starts creating more of a C or a U curve. And how I end my U curve is I like to use the 2 seams on the wig cap as my guidelines of when I stop doing the curves. And you will see later on. So as you guys can see, I am getting closer to the seam. And once my U ends at the seam, that's when I'm just going to go ahead and start drawing lines horizontally until I finish drawing the lines and it fills up the entire cap. So boom, as you guys can see, I am now done. And I stopped at the seams, and now I'm going to go ahead and start drawing the lines horizontally until I reach at the top of the frontal. And this is how your wig should look like. Nice and marked and ready to sew. All right, and I went ahead and just plaited the hair just so it won't get in my way when I'm sewing. And this is how the hair is looking like. It is very nice and voluminous. Like I did say, the specs on the hair will be down below. This is from UNice hair. And I went ahead and unraveled it, and I like to keep it double wefted. And the sewing machine I'll be using is my Brother XM2701 sewing machine. And I'm not going to teach you exactly how to use a sewing machine. But I'm going to show you how I make my wigs with a sewing machine. And I want to make sure that the pattern that I'm using is on the number 3, which is the zigzag motion. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is double weft the bundles. So on the first bundle, I like to go ahead and stack the tracks right on top of each other or right next to each other. And when I'm sewing, I like to sew a little bit first, backtrack, and then start again. So as you guys can see, I am pinching the tracks together just so that they could be right next to each other. And you guys are going to see exactly what I'm talking about when I'm doing it. So when I'm sewing, I just like to have my index finger on the side of the track just to kind of keep it in place when I'm sewing it, and then the other hand just pushing it against each other. So I'm just pushing the 2 tracks against each other so it is nice and close to each other. And this is how I double weft my bundles. And for the ending part, I just like to go ahead and sew and backtrack and then sew back. And this will just ensure that it won't unravel. So I went ahead and cut off the thread, and this is how it should look. And I did that for all 4 bundles. And doing this method just ensures that your wig stays flat and you're able to add as much hair as you want. So now I'm going to go ahead and flip over the wig upside down, and I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess cap that I have that is underneath the frontal area. And this would just give me like the true shape of how like the wig is going to feel like. As you guys can see, this is how it's looking like without that excess cap underneath. And it just helps me sew better. Now on to sewing the wefts onto the wig. I like to place the weft starting at the bottom and placing it onto the guideline. I'm going to go ahead and lower down the needle and also the footer as well. And then I'm going to go ahead and just start sewing. So when I like to sew, I like to follow the method SPS. So S as in stretch slightly, place, and then we're going to sew. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and stretch slightly and then start sewing. And I like to sew and then backtrack just to make sure that it is secured on those ends so it doesn't fall apart. And what I'm doing right now is I'm slightly stretching the cap just to make sure that the surface is nice and flat and there's no wrinkles from when I'm sewing. So we are going to stretch slightly. You're then going to place on the guideline, and then you're going to continue to sew. And when you're sewing, there should be no lumps or bumps when you are sewing. So as you guys can see, whenever I'm sewing, the surface is nice and flat. I'm going to go ahead and backtrack and then come back forward again just to make sure that those ends are secure and it doesn't unravel on me. And I'm going to go ahead and take it off and cut off the excess thread that is left over. And this is how it should look. As you guys can see, there are no wrinkles or bumps and it is nice and secure. So like I said, you're going to go ahead and place it. You're going to lower your needle down and then your plate down as well. You're going to stretch slightly. You're going to place and then sew. So stretch slightly, place it on the guideline, and then sew. And like I said, I don't like using stretch, but for lack of better words, I just like to say stretch just because I just want to make sure it is flat enough, or the surface is flat enough where there's no lumps or bumps, because when you have wrinkles in your wig, it's now altering the size of your wig and potentially making it smaller. So like I said, at the ends, I just like to go ahead and backtrack at those ends. And as you guys can see, there's not a single lump in sight. And I like to just brush the hair just because there be some, you know, leftover hair that is shedding from when I cut the wefts. And I'm just doing this all around the wig. Gonna stretch, place, and then sew. And then don't forget, when you get towards the end of the wig cap, you're just going to go ahead and backtrack at least once or twice and then cut off. And this is me at like the 3/4 mark of me finishing the wig. And as you guys can see, I just cut off just the excess track that I have when I reach the end of the guideline. And now I'm just working on the track that is horizontal. And then we're just going to go ahead and backtrack and then sew again. Now when it comes to the last track, I like to make sure it is right next to the lace frontal, so in a sense it's marrying each other. And I just like to make sure I'm stretching out the frontal just enough so that there's no lumps and bumps on the perforated part of the frontal. And then when I am done, it's nice and flat and it doesn't, like, you know, bulk up. And this is how it should look, you guys. And this is how it looks like on the mannequin head. It's nice and flat, and also how it looked like on my head. I hope you guys found this video very informative. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Later.